Media outlets are framing street protests as a rehearsal for Americans to challenge the Supreme Court, should it obstruct Trump. But does this reflect true democracy, or is it merely a maneuver by the usual power players?
Hello, and welcome to That News Show, where we discuss the latest facts, fakes, and hypocrisy as reported by the legacy media. Let's roll the tape.
MSNBC reports that the recent protests were merely a rehearsal, preparing Americans for potential challenges from the Supreme Court in opposing President Trump. The real danger is not the court's rulings, but the increasing belief that laws are only significant when they benefit one's own side. What appears to be grassroots democracy is actually a coordinated effort by elite institutions and their media allies to undermine any decision obstructing their agenda. Let's do this.
That's not his motivation. He uses them because he has no interest in building consensus, no interest in forming coalitions, no real interest in winning people over beyond the MAGA core base. I mean, he really hasn't even tried to push the bulk of his agenda through Congress at all, aside from the big ugly bill. That's not going so well currently. The thing is, he doesn't like the hard work the governing requires because he prefers to rule like a strongman, demanding with a version of a MAGA wand that his orders be carried out by the stroke of a pen. And at this point, he knows he can get away with it because the Republican Party surrendered its power to Donald Trump a very long time ago. And the institution of Congress, another branch of government under Republican control, has surrendered much of its power too.
When Democrats incite their base to protest every legal defeat, it undermines democratic resilience and poses a threat to the rule of law, paving the way for chaos. This sets a dangerous precedent. The No Kings movement and mainstream media rhetoric are essentially coordinated efforts to undermine the Supreme Court when it does not align with progressive demands. For years, Democrats and their judicial allies have used these injunctions to delay or derail meaningful reforms, despite public demand for action on border security, regulatory relief, and economic growth. The real story here is not about a lack of consensus or coalition building within the Republican Party, but rather about the new obstruction conservative leaders have faced from entrenched Democratic interests, activist judges, and a media establishment determined to undermine efforts to restore constitutional order. The country deserves more than perpetual resistance for its own sake. The Supreme Court's recent decision to limit nationwide injunctions is a long overdue correction, curbing judicial overreach that has allowed unelected district judges to block legislative and public will for too long. Under Republican leadership, Congress is effectively using tools like reconciliation, budget authority, and committee oversight to fulfill promises made to working Americans. The left's response to these reforms has been to organize mass protests and delegitimize any institution that opposes their agenda. Instead of lamenting the restoration of constitutional checks and balances, critics should question why the Democratic Party and its media allies are so determined to maintain a status quo that has let down many Americans. Respecting judicial outcomes, popular or not, is fundamental to a stable republic. Contrary to the narrative promoted by left-leaning outlets, we are not witnessing a surrender of congressional power, but a necessary recalibration of the separation of powers. Americans are weary of endless investigations, manufactured crises, and activist resistance that prioritizes ideology over national interest.
That brings us to today, when the conservative majority on the Supreme Court decided that it too would surrender some of its power to Donald Trump. In a 6-3 decision split along ideological lines, the Supreme Court significantly curtailed the power of its own federal courts to stop a lawless president. Now, at the core of the case was one of Trump's most egregious executive orders, his decision to unilaterally end the long-standing precedent that anyone...
The Supreme Court's recent decision to limit nationwide injunctions has been criticized by many on the left as a dangerous endorsement of unchecked executive power. If a policy is unconstitutional, plaintiffs can still unite to challenge it, but the era of immediate nationwide blocks by activist judges is over. As the left increasingly resorts to protest or resistance, they risk compromising the very institutions designed to safeguard our freedoms. Democrats may continue to depict any reduction in judicial power as a democratic threat, while Republicans and constitutionalists will likely view it as a necessary restoration of balance. Predictably, the Democratic Party and its media allies are framing this as a threat to American democracy, ignoring that their reliance on nationwide injunctions surged only after losing federal control. The No Kings protests, though sizable and organized, seem more focused on opposing election results and Supreme Court rulings they dislike rather than defending constitutional rights. Policy-wise, this decision compels opponents of administration policies to organize legitimate plaintiffs and build substantial cases, moving away from depending on sympathetic judges to enforce their will nationally. The enduring challenge is whether the opposition will adhere to the rules they advocate for when in power, or if they will escalate actions potentially harming the nation's stability and unity. We are not seeing a surrender of judicial authority to the president, but rather a necessary adjustment after years of judicial overreach that transformed federal district courts into quasi-legislative bodies. As elections approach, this topic will clearly become a focal point for both sides, particularly for those who value a government where each branch respects its boundaries and the electorate's decisions. The outcry from the left over this decision is ironic, considering their history of executive overreach during the Biden-Harris administration, which saw numerous executive orders on issues from border enforcement to regulatory changes, many blocked by the courts. Instead, it reinforces constitutional balance by requiring that legal challenges be filed by directly affected parties, and that relief be limited to those parties, or, in exceptional cases, to certified classes. This pattern is familiar. When progressives lose through democratic processes, they often resort to mass mobilization, challenging the legitimacy of any opposing institution. If every Supreme Court decision prompts massive protests and accusations of illegitimacy, the nation risks falling into continuous turmoil, undermining any remaining authoritative structures. This isn't democracy, it's minority rule enforced by unelected judges with lifetime appointments. This means that states must individually contest their cases in court, which may slow some legal challenges, but also ensures they are more legitimate and based on actual, not speculative, grievances.
Now, in a chilling dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor, writing for the three liberal justices, wrote, "No right is safe in the new legal regime the court creates. Today, the threat is to birthright citizenship. Tomorrow, a different administration may try to seize firearms from law-abiding citizens or prevent people of certain faiths from gathering to worship. The rule of law is not a given in this nation nor any other. It is a precept of our democracy that will endure only if those brave enough in every branch fight for its survival." In every branch, that's a key part.
The Supreme Court's decision is a critical moment for the separation of powers, but it is not the dire threat to rights as portrayed by MSNBC and some liberal justices. MSNBC's use of imagery, like newborns and strollers at protests, seems designed more to stir anxiety than to inform viewers about the legal proceedings. Such rhetoric, often amplified by MSNBC, exemplifies how some media outlets may incite public fear and challenge institutional legitimacy when court outcomes don't align with their ideological views. Consider MSNBC's repeated assertions that the court's decision could enable a future administration to confiscate firearms from law-abiding citizens. Claiming that the Supreme Court's decision marks the end of American rights is not only misleading, but also does a disservice to viewers who seek truthful analysis. Justice Sotomayor's dissent, supported by other liberal justices, portrays a concerning scenario of a new legal regime where rights are perceived as vulnerable, touching on issues from birthright citizenship to firearms and religious liberty. The portrayal of the Supreme Court's ruling as a constitutional crisis and the No Kings protest as a valiant stand skews towards partiality, lacking in balance and objectivity. There's a notable absence of effort to verify the majority opinion's substance or to explain the legal reasoning behind it. There's a significant underrepresentation of constitutionalists or legal experts who agree with the majority's reasoning, and there's scant discussion of the issues with unelected judges issuing broad nationwide injunctions that can overturn voter decisions in multiple states. The network's reliance on activist sources and legal scholars aligned with their perspective also questions their credibility. Regarding birthright citizenship, MSNBC overlooks that the Supreme Court did not decide on the executive order's constitutionality, but merely limited the use of nationwide injunctions. MSNBC's coverage, though visually striking and emotionally engaging, frequently merges reporting with activism. The court has consistently upheld that firearms commonly used by law-abiding citizens, such as AR-15s, are protected under the Second Amendment. Media should foster informed debate and uphold respect for the rule of law, even when the outcomes are inconvenient. The idea that this ruling leads to widespread gun confiscation lacks factual support. The focus remains on highlighting dissent and organizing resistance, often selecting polling data and expert opinions that predominantly support a progressive viewpoint. This approach restores constitutional order rather than dismantling rights.
We have long known what the court's conservative majority thinks about their role in constraining him. After all, this court did grant him broad immunity from prosecution just a year ago. The big question, one of them, is what happens next?
The narrative that the court's conservative majority is merely providing blanket immunity or acting as a rubber stamp for the current administration overlooks the significant constitutional principles involved. The fact that opposition groups and their media allies are staging dress rehearsals for resistance underscores their reluctance to accept outcomes that diverge from their agenda. The ongoing question is whether the opposition will adhere to the system's rules or escalate their tactics, risking further instability. This isn't about unchecked power. It's about ensuring that legal challenges stem from actual harm and are brought by legitimate parties, not activists seeking favorable courts. We are witnessing a concerted effort to restore balance among the government's branches, correcting years of judicial overreach, where unelected judges could dictate national policy with a single ruling. Financially, the stakes are high for households and the broader economy. The Supreme Court's recent decisions pave the way for regulatory stability, crucial for job growth, wage increases, and sustained investment. When policies are continually disrupted by sweeping injunctions, it creates uncertainty for businesses, halts investments, and undermines consumer confidence. The size of these protests is new, and their message is clear. When unable to secure victories through legal or electoral means, some progressives attempt to delegitimize the institutions blocking their path. When courts concentrate on legitimate, localized issues instead of broad national directives, the legal system becomes more attuned to actual needs rather than ideological battles. Now, with a focus on constitutional order and economic freedom, there's a genuine chance to rebuild American prosperity from the ground up. This isn't about democratic accountability, it's about clinging to power by any means. This tactic does not enhance democratic resilience. Rather, it erodes the rule of law and fosters division, complicating future planning for families and small businesses. In response, the left has intensified its efforts through mass mobilizations like the No Kings protests. The Supreme Court's adjustment is a vital correction, curtailing a period where a single judge could overturn policies supported by millions and reaffirming that the populace, through elected officials, should primarily direct the nation's course. From a household perspective, this political turbulence directly translates into higher costs, whether due to inflation fueled by uncertainty or increased taxes and regulatory expenses driven by activist litigation. And there you have it. Now, as President Trump works to restore order and sovereignty, this group refuses to accept their loss. What we're witnessing is not a spontaneous movement for justice, but a coordinated campaign by elite institutions that have long sought to undermine the will of the American people. The left and its media allies aren't protesting on principle. They're throwing a tantrum because the Supreme Court is blocking their path to power. Be sure to comment below. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It's all of our jobs to keep them honest. Goodbye.